So Michael Gove is in the paper today. He's on a mission, apparently, to restore times tables and to ensure that primary schools return to traditional values. I wonder whether we've heard that before. I think actually we've heard it for the past 30 years. And I'm going to try and give a perspective of this from those people whose voice is rarely, if ever, heard, and that is the voice of the teacher. He says he wants primary schools to have to teach foreign languages. He says it as though it's something new, but I can remember, for example, in the 80s, they certainly were teaching foreign languages in primary schools then. He wants to reform basic literacy. Well, we had the literacy hour and all that sort of thing some years ago. That was with the Labour Party, I think. It all merges into one, really, because it's all the same. He says that the system lacks rigour and pupils don't have a basic grasp of the 3 R's. And then he says Latin and Greek could be taught from the age of 7. Latin and Greek. Now, I did Latin, and I don't think it would be my priority for 7-year-olds. It is useful, but there are other things which are far more important, and you have to bear in mind that he doesn't seem to have any realisation of the fact that lots of children at the age of 7 can't understand basic English terms, let alone Latin and Greek. This is ambition taken to an extreme, I think, to teach Latin and Greek to all 7-year-olds. Now, I don't want to be unkind to Mr. Gove, but I'm afraid to say that the only qualification for being Minister for Education is that you have to have gone to school. And that is his qualification, and he's going on that basis to make decisions about how 7-year-olds will be taught. So because he presumably learnt Latin and Greek at school, he thinks it's a good idea for all 7-year-olds to learn Latin and Greek. And he doesn't have any understanding of what the average 7-year-old is like nowadays and what their starting point is. But the thing about ministers for education who keep making these pronouncements year after year is that the population will agree with them. And they know they're saying what the population wants to hear. They know that teachers are not going to disagree with them either, because teachers will believe in teaching the 3 R's, etc. So they're on fairly safe ground. But actually, I'm going to try to show you that every time they make these pronouncements, their policies then go on to undermine what they say they're going to do. So let's take something a bit more down to earth, which everybody agrees with, which is the importance of learning the times tables. Now, if you were to say to a 7-year-old, you've got to learn your times tables, and tell them to do that as homework, they would come back and they wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't be able to recite the times tables at all. So there are basically 3 methods of teaching the times tables. The first is to chant them. And that's certainly what I did at school, and that's probably what Mr. Gove did at school as well. You know, the sort of thing. We used to sway to the rhythm of the times tables, and 1 9 is 9, 2 9s are 18, 3 9s are 27, etc. And that's a very good way of teaching the times table. But you would have to do it for, I would say, probably about 10 minutes at the beginning of every maths lesson for a number of years. And if you did that, all children would know their times tables. The second method, of course, is to sing the times tables. I'm not an expert on that. I've never taught in the primary school, and I don't know any songs, but I imagine that would be very effective too. And the third method, of course, is to tattoo the times tables on both your arms. You could do table 2 to 6 on one arm and 7 to 12 on the other arm. I'm only joking, of course. So how do Mr. Goves and every Minister for Education, I don't want to pick on him particularly, how do his policies conflict with this aim to improve literacy? Well, the first thing he needs to do is he needs to tell his stormtroopers, Ofsted, what his policy is and what he wants, because Ofsted would fail any teacher who chanted the times tables for 10 minutes at the beginning of a lesson. Now I'm going to give you some of the rules that teachers learn about how to cope with Ofsted. First thing is that you have to share the objectives with the children at the beginning of the lesson. So the lesson objectives would be the same basically for every maths lesson. You would start by doing the tables. So you would say every day, today we are going to do the 5 times table, or today we are going to do the 9 times table, or today we're going to do the 8 times table. You can imagine how incredibly bored the kids would get listening to this day after day. And I just want to make it clear at this point that when I say how bored they would be listening to this, I'm talking about listening to the lesson objectives being repeated. I'm not talking about the boredom of doing times tables, because I actually don't think children would find it boring. I think they would enjoy it. The second rule for surviving Ofsted is that you have to have pace in your lesson. So if you were reciting the times table for 10 minutes at the beginning of the lesson, already you would have a fail down on the lesson observation sheet that Ofsted would have in front of them, because your lesson would not have any pace. You'd just be reciting the tables. Another very important rule if you want to survive Ofsted is that you have to have differentiation within your lesson, which means that you have to teach children of different abilities in a different way. And if you're chanting tables, you haven't got any differentiation. Well, my husband joked that yes, you have some differentiation, because some of the children will chant the tables more fluently than others. And actually, believe it or not, he was joking when he said that, but this is known as differentiation by outcome. And you're not allowed to have just that anymore. You have to have more types of differentiation than simply differentiation by outcome. So that would be, again, a failure from Ofsted. Other requirements to pass an Ofsted inspection would be to have a variety of different teaching skills. If you're just chanting tables, you won't have that. But as I've said before, the best way of learning the tables is to chant them for about 10 minutes at the beginning of a lesson. You also have to have something which is called assessment for learning, which is basically continually checking that the children have understood what they're doing, etc. So you'd have to stop your chanting of tables all the time and check they understood. I don't know how you do that. This doesn't fit in with what Ofsted requires at all. Apart from anything else, it's not entertaining. Ofsted is looking to see whether, it was explained to teachers as having a buzz in the room. There has to be a buzz in the room, there has to be excitement, etc. Well, the children are going to be sort of lulled into I remember when I used to recite the tables, it was really very comforting, very rhythmic, and it really calmed us down. It's an excellent way of getting discipline in the classroom, etc., but it would be anathema to the modern politician, and certainly to the Ofsted inspector. I can just hear an Ofsted inspector talking to the head teacher about a lesson observation in which the first 10 minutes was spent chanting tables. He'd say something like this: "The lesson lacked pace, and there was absolutely no challenge given to the children at all. It was appalling." And that lesson would be graded unsatisfactory, inadequate, I think is the word they use. So, what I want to get across to parents listening to this, and anybody who's just interested in education, is that Ministers for Education, it's easy to talk, but their policies actually undermine what they say they're trying to do. And this happens all the time. I've just given one example. Now, I don't know whether anybody here has ever listened to Charlotte Isabel Thompson. She was education policy advisor for Ronald Reagan, and she wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, because she had observed in the course of her work that there were policies being put in place which were deliberately aimed at dumbing the education down so that the population would become suitably brainwashed and brain dead in order to allow the politicians to introduce a one world government without any resistance from a thinking population. That was what she said. Well, I've been observing what's been happening in education in Britain for many years, and for most of the time I have thought that the politicians are merely stupid. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a deliberate policy. Maybe it's cleverer than I think. I really don't know, but it's an interesting point to debate.